Dylan Harris, after many offline conversations, it's great to have you online with the Singletrack podcast. How are you doing on this early March afternoon?
I'm good. Yeah, it's been cool. Been cool to build a friendship with you a bit first, and finally make this happen and have an excuse to have a cool conversation. So thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
There's probably no one in the ultrarunning community that has watched Unbreakable more than you have in the last 2 to 3 years. And off the top of your head, what are some of the things that film did well?
God, there's a lot of things that film did really well. I would say a major thing that I'm starting to recognize a little bit later in the game, as I've kind of built more of a relationship with it, is that the film was very timely. There was a lot of pieces of the story that were kind of these intangibles that came together for that to be so special. But other than that, I mean, it's really just time and a pursuit of a well-rounded story. And oftentimes in ultra running, that doesn't exist so much, because I think a lot of creatives are a bit consumed with getting paid, and that's got to exist for us for sure. We've got to pay the bills, but in turn, that equals a lot of jobs with brands. You're following a creative direction, you're following a budget, you're following a brand's agenda to work with a certain athlete at a certain race. You're not putting story first. And the thing that Unbreakable did was the story was 1000% first. There was no money in the beginning. It was a pursuit of a beautiful story for the ultra running community. And that's what it did so well. And because of that, there were no limitations on how the story was told. So there was J.B. Benna, the director. I think it took him 2 years to put that together, and you can really feel it in the film. You can feel that. You can feel the work that went into it, the time spent. Even at the end of the film, you go back and you see the athletes' reflections from a year. A year had gone by, and to me, that was so special. And at the end of it, to me, I just feel like those guys are bonded for life, and that's what ultra running is pretty much. I thought that really it was just the time spent and the passion to tell a well-rounded story, which unfortunately, as the sport grows and more money comes into it, creatives are getting pulled, like I said, to these brand jobs. That's not existing as much anymore. I think a lot of the films that are coming out now, and honestly, like, I'm a fan of the sport, and I'm a fan first, and I'm a part of the community first. And so I do see the intrigue in these, and I understand why they work. But when you're just showing up to a race and, all you've got is a pre-race interview and a post-race interview, and then God forbid something happened in that race, maybe they DNF'd, maybe your athlete didn't even finish or whatever, you really just have a moment in time. I think it is good to slow down. I mean, that's what documentary is. Documentary is telling a story. And right now, we're attempting, with how much content's going out in the world, we're attempting to tell a story the moment it happens. But in true documentary, that's not exactly how it's always gone, right? It's always been more of a reflection of what has occurred overall and then what resulted. So that's why you see positive reactions to films with athletes. Like, I think we saw, right, that one with Jim Walmsley where they followed him for like 3 years, right? I mean, super special, right? Because you got to see the goal, the dream. You got to see it stripped from him. You got to see him fight and build back up and go for it again. And you got to see him come out victorious. And what does it all mean? Like,
given what you're describing there, like that long of a timeline, I'm surprised that any brand in this day of age has the patience to let a project run that long for a story to come to fruition.
From what I've learned being in the space, it definitely takes a special athlete. Like, it takes a franchise player for sure. Like, it takes somebody who a brand's committed to and hopes to have around for a long time. And, there's little there's ways brands can work it where they can make smaller pieces out of overall larger goal with the athlete. But yeah, you're not seeing it so much, but I know it's coming. I mean, there's some of the larger athletes now in professional ultra running are now working with directors and creatives who are outside of ultra running, which is very interesting. And that's very new, I think.
Did you ever get a chance to talk with JB in the last 2 years as you were preparing this film? Because you mentioned, for example, that Unbreakable film was sort of a labor of love. It was self-financed and sort of after the fact. They put the pieces together when it came to financing. So my knowledge is that he's largely out of the sport. I think he's like a realtor now, or he's in real estate of some sort. So yeah, what research did you get done there?
Yeah, I've never talked to him before, but yeah, for me, it was just kind of hopping onto his YouTube. He did a really good job about sharing some behind the scenes stuff, some extras. So yeah, it was me just sort of looking into things, seeing how he accomplished it. And yeah, I'll say Unbreakable 1000% was the inspiration for this film. But my dad, this is a good example. My dad is a musician growing up, and he told me it's almost harder to recreate a song or to make a unique cover for a song than it is to write your own song. Because you have all the pieces there and you see it work. And so it's impossible to reimagine how it could work any differently, And I think that was the struggle with Unbreakable, was that in many ways that was kind of from Jamil, basically the producer of the film. That was basically the guidelines here, is hey, I think we have something special like this. 10, 11 years down the road at a new distance that's evolving the same way that 100-mile distance was evolving at that point in time when Unbreakable was made. So we had different pieces, but the hard part was to really respect Unbreakable enough to not fly too close to the sun in terms of trying to recreate that film, because what we had was different. And luckily for documentary type stuff, that's kind of just how it plays out, because you have different athletes, different life stories, a different race. So yeah, that was definitely the biggest challenge, was in the beginning, trying to think, how can we structure this so that it pays homage but doesn't copyright, right? So,
and what did you come up with? What were the differentiators?
So one of the main things that stood out was that the race is 3 days long. Western states, I think they were, what were they? They were at around 15 hours. So, Cocodona for these guys was roughly around 60 hours. And so having to tell these guys stories throughout the race while throwing in their stories from back home and also making it make sense was very difficult. And in Unbreakable, basically these guys were all within 30 minutes of each other to some varying degree. Most of them were much closer than that. And so the action always made sense. But for Cocodona, as the race gets further along, you have guys taking naps. And so you have these gaps that are much larger. Fortunately, we had a race on our hands at Cocodona. And so some of the guys were very close and there was action, which was so cool. But at the same time, you did have one person in the second half coming in at sunrise, where another person is hitting a spot in the dead of night, And so it was kind of unfolding naturally in a way in which you had to pick and choose which story you're going to go with here. You couldn't tell each guy's story at every single aid station, at every single waypoint, because it was going to be repetitive and it was going to jump. It was going to feel jumpy. And so, that was a huge challenge in itself right there. Yeah.
One of the things you said about Unbreakable was that because JB had sort of a never-ending there was sort of no due date because he kind of came up with the idea himself. He had like a year after the fact to come back to, Anton and Jeff and Hal and, like Scott Jurek is in there. Like there was like this like almost like year break between the experience and the reflection. Do you feel like you had like a similar amount of time for this to soak in? Like there are so many moments in the film where the moment seems right for them to really think critically about what just happened or what transpired at the race. But how much weight do you put into like sort of sitting with the experience and then, going back to these film subjects and getting their take on what transpired?
Yeah, well, so the post race, like the reflections that I got from all of the athletes happened immediately after the race. The only one who I couldn't get, just logistically, it didn't work out, was Mike McKnight. So I actually had to wait to get his reflection on the race. But for everybody else, it happened immediately after, which I think was appropriate. I think you would get those reflections regardless. I do think in a perfect world, if we didn't have a due date and we didn't want to get this thing out prior to the next Cocodona, then I would have loved to go back and see how these guys think about what occurred. Somebody like Joe McConaughy, who I know has feelings about that race and what could have transpired versus what did. And I mean, I think they all have those feelings, but there's also more so than the race. There was actually a lot of things about that were happening in these guys' lives at that moment, which I would love to reflect on as well. Like a huge, one of my favorite little scenes in the film is Mike Versteeg and his new child. And, to me, Mike Versteeg is this like brash dirtbag figure who we all romanticize, right? And he is, you hang out with him and he's everything you want him to be, right? But at the same time, you sit down in an interview with him prior to a race like this, and he tells you everything's different now. And everything's different because he is now doing things for a completely different reason. And, that's to make his daughter proud of him and to do things that she can look back and think we're cool in these positive things. And so, I would love to go back and talk with Mike about how that's evolved and, how he feels about his performance and stuff. But moments like that.
Yeah, I think because this is top of mind because I just rewatched it last night. The exact quote is, one of the cliches of parenthood is, yes, there is a before and there is an after, like you just described. It's like in that before time of my life is dead. That version of me is dead, and this is like the alive version of me, which I thought was really the fact that he's able to like shed an old version of self seemingly so easily. Again, like you think about how complicated each of these characters are, and that flexibility of character that Versteeg has is fascinating because I always pegged him as like extreme and maybe in his own version of extreme, set in his ways. But he seems in that film so willing to go with the flow as necessary.
I totally agree. God, that guy always puts a smile on my face, honestly. Like, yeah, he comes from a good place, super humble, very interesting character. And yeah, he honestly, like, his intentions around the whole race are just so beautiful. Like he believes wholeheartedly that this race is one of the best things to happen to ultrarunning. And he shows up to almost prove to feed a relationship that he has with Jamil that is so special, basically about just supporting him and supporting this race. And yeah, I don't know. Sorry, I'm a little lost with that one, but
no. Why does he put so much significance on the race? Like, why does he think it's one of the best things that could have happened to the sport?
He feels So Versteeg feels that Cocodona is basically this, it's much more than trail running. It's much more than ultra running. It's like an experience. And something he said in an interview while we were shooting was that he's actually envious of first time runners, because he feels like he compared it to watching your favorite movie for the first time. He's like, it'll never be, you'll keep you'll keep watching it over and over again, but it might never be as good as that first time. And just to get to experience it for the first time and have that life-changing moment. And what's really beautiful is the way that Versteeg, as like a mature contender in this race, talks about Arlen and Arlen's experience. Because this race truly, Versteeg talks about how, like, for Arlen, this race did so much more than be a good result for Arlen on his ultra sign up. This race might have changed the direction of his life, possibly. And that's how he responded to the race in the days following, was that, this race has opened up a new sector in his brain and how he feels about running and his career. And it was really special.
When you think about these 4-5 characters, if you include Harry, you had a chance to embed yourself with each one of them. You got to know them pretty well below the surface. If you're thinking about the impact that each of them had on you, which lifestyle of the 4 or the 5 was the most intriguing to you, and why?
I mean, so I think filming with Arlen Glick was probably one of the most influential experiences I've ever had, especially while working. Absolutely, while working. I kind of have talked about it, like, when you go on vacation and you're somewhere new and you could be just walking down the street, you could be at a restaurant and you're just so engaged because everything's new. And you're like, I'm walking down the street, but this is fun, where you wouldn't do the same thing in your own neighborhood, right? For Arlen and to have his family welcome me, to have all of his brother, and I mean, he's one of 9 children, to have all of his brothers and sisters come over for a dinner. I mean, they drove from all over to come over. I think in his kitchen and living room at one point, he probably had 40 people. They're all like his close family. And just to see his upbringing, and I didn't exactly define it in the film because I didn't feel that was so important. But he's a Mennonite. And
what does that mean?
Well, I would say that a Mennonite is probably it's kind of like a subgenre of Amish.
Okay.
And so, I don't want to kind of be the spokesperson for how this is defined, but basically how I started to, I remember when I was on my flight over there to Ohio, I was kind of looking it up and I was like, trying to understand it more. And it's hard to define Mennonite these days. Each community is a little bit different. And so a lot of them will talk about what they believe and what they practice as what their community believes, whereas they might live pretty close to other Mennonite communities that practice a little bit differently. But for Arlen, I mean, God, there was every door we walked into, everything we did was just, was so new, so fresh to me, so cool. I mean, you got a guy who's specializing in 100-mile trail races. He lives in Ohio. Like, luckily, he lives near a path that he can run on. Otherwise, he would literally be running on straight roads, like grid roads where there's no shoulder, and it's just like farmland and agriculture. But he luckily lives like a half mile from a path that he can run to the next town and back. It's just so special to see somebody like that value family so much and not see his situation as a limitation, but more as this representation of who he is and how hard he's willing to work. And to me, it's so cool. He sees his differences as something that is so special. And something I loved about Arlen as well that I've taken with me is that although Arlen maybe lives differently than the majority of Americans, or grew up a little bit differently and has different practices. He doesn't talk about anything as if they are just what he's always believed. He talks about everything that he does in his life and all the decisions he makes as well thought out discoveries that he's had through like his own life experience. And to me, I had so much respect for that. And so it wasn't just like, oh yeah, we don't use social media. It was more like, no, I've been around and I've seen the way people use social media. Here's what I feel about it. Here's what I believe. And here's the reason why I continue to feel that it's a good decision for me, you know? And so I thought that was really cool.
I'm always impressed by people, regardless of background, who have a particular worldview or faith or lifestyle, whatever you want to call it. And then, for example, in Arlen's case, they are actually also very worldly people because, you know, his family, I think they, like you communicate in the film, partially made a living traveling the country sort of as a family band, singing in prisons. So he's had his lifestyle repeatedly, frequently tested over the years, and I'm sure fine-tuned, but at the end of the day, he still has his core belief system and lifestyle largely intact. Like I think about like every time I'm exposed to something that I thought was fundamental kind of like crumbles immediately and I'm like a totally new person. But like they're largely intact after doing such a significant amount of travel and exposure to all these different people and cultures across the world. I found that fascinating.
I've never seen anything like it. The way that family has come together and the way that they work together every single day, day in and day out, is unbelievable. I mean, I think happiness is not the right word. It's more of, yeah, maybe just this confidence in the way that they're living to be of value, and they're all in it together as a team. And I felt that, and they were, you know, they're just very proud, very wholesome, like welcoming people. And, you know, for Arlen, it's so cool. He literally is the only pro athlete that any of those people know, you know, and he definitely wears that as like a badge, you know, a badge of honor. But he involves his family. I mean, when he went out and raced in Colorado, I forget which race it was.
Maybe Hard Rock?
What's the other one he ran?
Oh, gosh.
Not Hard Rock.
Run Rabbit.
Run Rabbit.
Run. Yeah.
I think he brought his niece and nephews out, and just to experience it and everything. And it's so cool because, you know, he's getting to come into ultra running and represent his values, but also getting to widen the perspectives of the people that in his community back home. And I think that's so cool. It's like a give and take. And I think ultra running at this point is still such a beautiful thing. And it's cool to see it still be so welcoming, no matter your background. And honestly, to watch somebody just dominate like that guy. Like, I mean, I've been around a lot of elites. Nobody wanted to win that race. I mean, it's hard to say nobody because Jeff Browning wanted to win that race so dang bad. But Arlen, dude, that guy wanted to win so bad. And he only was willing to, like, and it all was based on hard work. That's where his confidence came from. Yeah, he's wildly impressive. And honestly, if we're on Arlen really quick, like I don't know when
I want to stay on him for. This can go for 4 hours. You got me.
Yeah. All right. So this is a fun story about Arlen. I did not put this into the film, and you know, this is how the myth goes, right? Like sometimes stories evolve, but this is my version of the story. So Arlen, I hope I'm saying it correctly, but yeah, back when he was 19, he was in a skiing accident, and the skiing accident was pretty bad. He tweaked his knee really bad, and you know, him being Mennonite and in that community, I'm not sure he went directly to like a big public hospital, right? And so he was injured, and so what he did was, in order to kind of recover from that injury, is he discovered running, and that's where he found running. He didn't run earlier on in his life. he found running through that ski accident. And he basically kept running very short distances. He used to run bare feet and in his sandals in the grass around their yard, and he just run circles and circles till he built up more and more distance. And then he just kind of found that he had kind of a good mind for running. He loved doing it consistently every day. Long story short, Arlen at the earlier on in his career wasn't sponsored. And so he's racing, having these great results. Then he has that third place finish at Western States, signs with Kraft, right? Kraft picks him up and they basically give him budget to then go see like a PT, strength and conditioning PT.
Wow.
His PT is working with him, and Arlen's quoted on this. Arlen hates working out. Arlen just wants to run. Like that's all he wants to do. So he'll do some of that stuff now, but he does not enjoy it very much. PT's working on him, and the PT starts feeling some stuff in his knee and is like, Arlen, have you ever like injured your knee before? And so Arlen tells him the story about the ski accident back when he was 19, but he's all better now, whatever. PT's like, no, you got some major issues going on here. Like we need to send you to get x-rays. So Arlen ends up going to get x-rays. Doctors just draw jaw to the floor, basically like, oh, so you said you're like a professional trail runner? Because you actually have just no ligaments in your knee, basically. So Arlen's essentially found running and become one of the most elite 100-milers that our country has to offer in some of the most technical races that our country has to offer, with no ligament in one of his knees. And so he found that information out a little bit before Cocodona, and he refused to tell anybody because he didn't want anybody to hold that against him or remind him about it, or his competitors to think that was going to hurt him by any means. Basically, his doctor said, Arlen, you know what? You've come this far, 250 more miles. Who gives a dang? Go run the race. Afterwards, we're going to do reconstructive surgery. And so that's why after Cocodona, he ends up getting reconstructive surgery instead of going on to run, what was it? I think Western States and UTMB
Sure.
right after, which is what he was originally going to do. And that's why he's not back at Cocodona this upcoming year.
Amazing. Yeah, that's a perfect story to shed light, because one of the things that I was going to mention that I loved that you included in the film was the scene in his bedroom where he's like, and by the way, you might notice that there's this tube popping out of the wall. Well, I've got this altitude temp, but it makes a ton of noise. So I put it in the other room, and I just have the tent in here, and here's the tube that connects to my bed. And I was just going to say to you, like, to me, that is so representative of how resourceful he is, despite every other environmental condition for success in our sport working against him, like only having that road out his house with no shoulder, and living on the East Coast with maybe not as deep a community of training partners around him. So yeah, like the fact that he was not going to disclose that injury or that this major surgery was imminent after the race, like just adds to his legend of like personal responsibility and no excuses. Similar to Versteeg, by the way. I feel like Versteeg is similar in that sense. Like he wants you to own everything.
Yeah. I mean, Versteeg, I'm pretty sure Versteeg had COVID right before Cocodona. And when I showed up to film with Versteeg, this is definitely like very interesting. So the funniest thing comparing these athletes was staying at their houses before Cocodona. And one of the best moves I made on accident was I made time to film with Jeff Browning and Michael Versteeg back to back. And because they both live in Arizona. And so I went and spent 3 days with Jeff Browning, who I don't know if we even need to introduce his tactics to running here, because I'm sure everybody kind of knows by now, but very strategic, overwhelmingly smart, passion out the roof, just very hard worker, very strategic, very dialed. So I'm staying with Jeff, and I'm literally eating something funny I did. Like I wanted to do whatever they were doing while we were there. So even when we would go and film like the workout scenes, I'd go and like get a few reps in with them or whatever. but I was eating how they were eating, which isn't normally that great for me because I'm, I have some intolerances, but, we were doing it anyways. And so I'm eating like Jeff Browning. I'm at his house. We're eating good, man. We're eating a bunch of protein. I'm drinking some cups of raw milk. Stuff's, we're feeling good. And then I leave and I go straight to Prescott where I show up to Versteeg's place. And I'll never forget, I showed up pretty late, like 8 p.m. or something. And, they just had their child. And so they're getting ready to go to bed. And he kind of brings me over to the school bus where I'll be sleeping and in his backyard. And we're outside and we're just kind of talking. And I was like, with Versteeg, we had nothing planned really. Everybody else, we had some kind of intentionality to what we were filming there. We had talked about it. Versteeg, no plans. So get over there and I'm sitting on the back porch, pitch dark, can't even see each other's faces. And I was like, what do you think you want to do tomorrow morning? Like, what should we do? And he's like, well, I figure we could just get up in the morning, maybe like, I don't know, 8 or 9 or something. And we'll just drink coffee until we feel like doing something. And I was like, that sounds great. And we get up, drink coffee. I get to pick my own mug because they're mug collectors there. Well, his wife is. And he presents me the clearance donuts from like Safeway or whatever, the ones that are half off because they're been out for a while.
The Jeff Browning mind could not comprehend that.
No. And then he tells me that he hasn't ran in like 2.5 weeks because he thinks he has COVID, but he's not sure. So the contrast, I mean, that's the word for me that I just keep using when it comes to this film, is just the contrast between characters and letting, the beauty of it. And something that was really like kind of evolutionary for me was sometimes as a storyteller, you feel that you need to protect, like you need to offer some sort of assistance to somebody's character almost, as if the audience will accept them more if I give you some sort of guidance to like, hey, you said that, so maybe let's talk a little bit more about this then, even though maybe this other topic isn't exactly how you feel in this moment, but maybe I'll include that to kind of contrast that. And you're kind of offering some assistance, and it's not the way it should be, but it's more of like a subconscious thing. And I think what was so beautiful about working with 5 different human beings who are so different from each other was allowing them to be authentic and exactly who they are, and allowing the contrast of all of their personalities and their experiences really become the story, and to allow each other's perspectives on running and in life really shine directly compared against their competitors. That's what was so cool to showcase Mike McKnight at his home, going to visit like his dad and showing the dairy farm that he grew up on, and kind of showing the pictures of him where he was overweight when he was younger that he hates. I know he doesn't like those. And to have him show those, and to have him be a little bit more, there's a moment in the film where he talks about how he hated growing up in his hometown, and now he never wants to leave. And I just think that like each athlete really, I think the stars aligned where each athlete was able to kind of be who they are, and that made the story better. And I also think that Cocodona and the way that Cocodona is set up it's a good canvas for athletes to be that, basically.
Prepping for this conversation, I was telling you before we clicked record that I watched this film, and then I went back and watched The Long Way Home, and I also watched Inaugural Year. And I think it's interesting that you get, I'm not going to say different versions, but you get 2 examples of Versteeg in 2 films. You get Versteeg in the first year of Cocodona, and you get Versteeg in this 4th edition. And I wrote down a couple quotes here because he is eminently quotable in that first year film. He says, and this is after the he gets to Crown King. He says, quote, "We're good at this. And that was gnarly. The mid and back of the pack is fucked."
Yeah, dude.
That. And then, you know, like he just talks about the overall brutality of like a first year tour. And he says, it's okay to say that this course beat me today. We don't need to come up with excuses. And like, I think I'd love to hear you compare and contrast Versteeg in that first year to this 4th year, because in the film you have him saying like, when all is said and done, the dust settled, he was stoked that he had like this quote unquote front row seat to what transpired in front of him with Arlen and Jeff and Harry, etc. So were there any differences? Was it the same old Versteeg? Like, what did you notice?
It's a really, really cool question. Something I've never considered, and it's really cool to think about. I would say that, so Versteeg's a really smart guy. He's somebody who thinks deeply before he speaks and thinks deeply before he acts. And I think that his intelligence, the intelligent side of him, can sometimes make a game out of life and out of things that he's doing. And I think he's comfortable enough with who he is as a person to be sometimes what maybe others might want him to be. Sort of. He's always said this about Cocodona, is he does feel that he is somewhat a part of the story and that he's this character in the story, and that his name is sort of directly correlated with that race, and that he does feel that there's a certain responsibility to sort of continue to be a part of the story. And I think, you know, when I think back to Versteeg, gosh, I'll never forget the first year of Cocodona. We were at Whiskey Row. He's in his hometown. He's got all of his Satisfy boys, you know, they're all there with their little camcorders, you know, just vibing out. Versteeg comes in, he's running down the streets, he's got his arms out and he's just running like this. He's got no shirt on. He's like running into his hometown. And he shows up and he's in first place. And he starts talking about how, like, when he wins this race, he wants to sit courtside at the Suns game, and he wants to be a part of the warm-ups and do like shoot arounds with like Chris Paul and all these guys, and just calling his shot super early, and being a character. And what's so special is such a good question that you just asked, because that is so grateful that this film did happen now, because I feel very close to Versteeg's story, and to see him now be a father and to be somebody who's ran this race multiple years, even the years that he knew he couldn't finish, to still show up and still be a part of it and continue that story is super special. And now the way that he talks about this race, he talks about the people who choose to come be a part of this as with a sense of pride. I mean, ask Versteeg about any of his competitors. Ask him about somebody like Jeff Garmire, who, you know, he's talked about a lot of times how that guy has shown up every single year and been incrementally better every single year, and that's what it's all about. And so, yeah, to see his perspective change, to see him start, he's really like kind of owning this race and owning what this race exists, or what exists within this race. To me, I kind of think of it, there's this philosophy that I've been playing around a lot with recently, which is like, in life, we all have a boulder to push, right? And so for me, I've kind of made storytelling as this boulder that I'm pushing for my entire life. I've always like romanticized the thought of getting about a journey and getting better at a skill throughout an entire lifetime, and hopefully by the end having some kind of expertise that you can then share and pass on to the next generation. And I think in some ways Cocodona has become like a boulder for a lot of people to push. I think Versteeg understands that it's not about a victory. It's not about a recognition. It's just about the change that continually happens as you show up each and every time at this race. And that's why I think he's going to continue to come back. And it's fun to talk to him about how excited he is to come back to Cocodona in a few years and just hang out with the mid packers in the back of the packers and just enjoy it. And, you know, maybe his intentions change at the race, but that doesn't take away from the motivation to do it and to go through it, you know.
So this is interesting, and I'm going to give you a little bit of context here before I ask a question. We've had Mike on the podcast before, and of all the guests that we have had, he might be the only one that I felt showed up like it was Game 7 of the NBA Finals, and he gave like 120% in the interview. You know, like he really would, like, even though it was a public moment, he was like, if I'm going to be here, we're going to stay in this recording room for as long as the conversation takes. I'm going to give you everything. And I hope that you give everything in return and that we like really honor this moment. And like, that was my impression of Mike in a media context. But then like having watched this film, it was interesting to see how he has the capacity for that. And then like at Crown King, for example, the spotlight was too much. Like he didn't want even like the smallest bit of publicity, and having that like swarm of people at the aid station around him, like he just had to bolt, right? Like he had to bolt so fast that he couldn't even take his nutrition with him. So my question to you is like, given that contrast, was it hard to get him in this film? Can you talk about sort of the recruitment process and like the buy-in that was required?
Yeah. So Mike is definitely very particular. And like I said, he's somebody who thinks deeply about the things that he wants to be a part of. And he really, so him and Jamil Coury go way back, and they really have a very special relationship. And he feels that Cocodona he almost feels like Cocodona is this perfect race that was almost made for him. It just sort of, it represents adventure. It represents the places that he grew up. It's like he gets to sort of join everybody else in this run, and he gets to show them, like, you know, some of his favorite parts of the places that he grew up. And so in that sense, I think Cocodona allows for special access when it comes to Michael Versteeg. Mike wants nothing to do with sort of showcasing his image and speaking his perspectives on a microphone, but he believes in Cocodona and he believes it's special. And so he wants to lean into that. And I think your experience with Mike McKnight is probably representative of that, of Cocodona, of, you know, what sort of comes from Cocodona and all of that. And also I know that he loves you. So he, yeah, that works out too. But, yeah, when it came to doing this film, I mean, if you're looking at all of these athletes, like if you're throwing your roster up on a sheet of paper, Mike McKnight, in terms of an interesting story,
You mean Versteeg?
Oh, sorry,
Versteeg. But I do want to talk about McKnight in a second.
Yeah. Michael Versteeg is sort of this, like, you know, I don't even know who to compare him to, but he's this really, you know, it's like styles make fights. You know, have you heard that?
Yeah.
Versteeg is somebody who just adds so much to the complexity of the film, and to me, he's like would be a required character to showcase what ultra running is all about. And I'm so happy that he is able to be a part of this story, to show those different angles and to show that contrast. And so when we first reached out to him, he actually, you know, that's what I love about him, is he tells the truth, and he's like, to be honest, Dylan, I don't want to be a part of the film. You know, like, I'm happy to share my story, but, you know, I don't necessarily I don't feel like what I feel is good in the sport is necessarily in line with what all these other characters in this film feel are good in the sport. And so I'm not sure that I want to be represented in the same piece of work with them. Not to say that I think they're bad people or anything. It's just that he doesn't see the value in that. And with that said, like he definitely has, like I said, a special relationship with Jamil and a passion for Cocodona, and that's ultimately what led him to being involved with the film. The only thing I remember saying to him on the phone call, which I know that he responded to really well, was that my personal belief was that what makes him unique and special would only shine brighter in comparison to people who maybe live life in a different way. And so, obviously, if you have a film on Mike Versteeg, you're going to get a certain audience, right? Who's going to tune into that. But if you have all of the characters who appeal to different people, then all of a sudden you've got Michael Versteeg's perspectives being able to be shared to a greater audience in comparison to the other people that the audience might have tuned into. And I think ultimately his message and his perspectives on running would shine brighter directly compared to different athletes and different perspectives.
That is such a great point. Yeah, now that I think about it, because you made me think this way, for people that are showing up to this film for Mike McKnight, how does Mike Versteeg inspire them? Or Arlen Glick or Joe McConaughy and vice versa, right? Like for the people that showed up for Mike Versteeg, how many people walk away thinking that, like, for example, the nature of Arlen Glick's family and their approach to life, like I'm going to take this, and this and bring it back to like the opportunity to put a character that is so contrasted to your belief system or lifestyle in front of you, I think is the magic of these films. It extends beyond ultrarunning.
Absolutely. And to get to see, I mean, that's what ultrarunning is. I mean, honestly, like, I think you've probably lived enough years and had enough life experience. I know for me, I've decided that any direction I go in life is going to be difficult, and I'm never going to be 100% like, oh, I found the answer. Why was I not doing this from the very beginning? It's like, I could be a filmmaker, and that's going to be really hard and be a lot of stresses. I could go get a 9-to-5 job, and for different reasons, that's going to be hard and be really stressful. And I think we all just sort of adapt to our circumstances, and everything's going to have its challenges and its pros. And so, damn, dude, I keep getting lost in the sauce. You're making me think too deeply.
Dude, you're making me think too deeply. Hey, this is the way, the way these episodes are supposed to go. Like in my dream world,
yeah,
we're supposed to like not finish sentences and be confused, because the goal is to try to like think, like you said, there's a version of podcasting where it's like performance marketing and everything is a script and it's tight and it's 45 minutes and you press publish. And then there's what I hope are the messier conversations where neither you or I know the answers and we're kind of coming up with things on the fly. And like that, I think that's where podcasting should go. So I think that we're recording an episode that is aspirational, like this film is hopefully, aspirational for the industry.
That's love that, dude.
So if we get to the end of a sentence and we're like, can you repeat the question? Like good,
yeah. That means we're going into uncharted territory.
I think
love
so.
that.
I think, and by the way, cut me off if we're ever going too long, because I want to be respectful of your time. But
no, let's keep it rolling.
Again, I learned a ton in this film about every single one of the characters, and I'm thinking about Jeff Browning. And one of the things that strikes me about Jeff is actually how adaptable he is. Like, if you're a super fan of the sport, Jeff in one sense as the guy who, for example, has chanted like the OFM diet from the mountaintop, right? Like he seems very like doctrinaire about that. But then at the same time, you have so many quotes of him in the film where he's like, a lot of people in my generation are not going to want to hear me say this, but like, I understand that the sport has to evolve. Like, I like that it's evolving, and like that is such like that you presented Jeff in a light that I did not appreciate until I watched the film. and maybe riff on that for a little bit, because I think that, like, it's, again, it was a new side of Jeff to me, at least.
I just want to make sure that I find the right words for Jeff, because, gosh, I don't know if I've ever been more proud of, right? So I didn't know Jeff before this race. Jeff is somebody, he really is a leader. And it shows just within, I went and filmed a lot of the lifestyle stuff with him at his home. Obviously, you see how dialed he is. He's a true professional. But I'm sure you've heard sometimes, like, a leader can go into a room and they just sort of like demand attention, and they kind of lead conversation organically. To me, that's Jeff. If you watch the way that Jeff races and the way that he raced in this film, he's somebody who demanded attention always. He always put himself in a place to make a move or to not make a move. He's always in control. It's not, should I go to sleep? Should I eat right now? It's no. Now is when I'm scheduled to go to sleep. And the way that he can compartmentalize the way he feels versus what he needs to do is so world class. And I've personally never worked with an athlete who has the mental fortitude, I guess, that Jeff Browning has. And so to me, the outcome of his race, it was, I'll never forget. And I know this isn't directly answering your question.
It's fine.
Standing on top of Mount Eldon after filming with his family, getting to know his family, understanding what he wanted out of this race, watching him take control and make it happen, seeing his timing being almost exactly spot on to when he said he was going to finish this 250-mile race, which is absurd in the first place. And then to be standing at the top of Eldon and to film him coming up the summit, and he can barely suck air into his body because his lungs are closing. He's stumbling. He's got a little bit of vertigo. And to watch him run off the top and just kind of shake it off, you get Harry, you get Arlen. I've got the live broadcast on my phone just playing in my pocket because I'm like, what is happening? And to watch what ended up resulting with that pass from Harry at the end, I was completely devastated. I was at the top of Eldon. I'll never forget it. I had felt that I had seen all the pieces line up perfectly for Jeff, where he's at in his career, how he handled this race and treated it. The evolution of him getting into first place and then ultimately holding that spot, to then not being able to pull off that win and getting past. I felt that it was devastating for the film. And then which is such a rookie thing to think, for me, I was like, the film's over, like this, and then to, understand later on that, like, how beautiful of a thing is it for this seasoned professional, a leader in the sport, to come out to Cocodona and still have the opportunity to learn something new in his life and to experience something that was so profound is what Cocodona is all about. And to me, it was almost like a script written by God, that it just had to occur this way. And to me, I think that Jeff Browning is somebody who gets everything that he deserves. And that's really cool. That's really cool, because there's a lot of things in my life that I get that I don't deserve. And so I would like to be a little bit more like Jeff Browning. And the way, that I would say something about Jeff is that it's said so beautifully in the film by his crew chief, George, that he speaks with so much passion and he speaks so large that oftentimes people miss some of the
how deep his philosophy is.
Yeah.
That was a great quote. I loved that. I have that written down.
Yeah, and it's so true. I mean, you can go out on a run with him, and I did do that, and you're just staring at his heels and you're just learning truth bombs all over the place. And these are from experience. To me, I just think, yeah, it's really cool to see somebody like Jeff be. Yeah, I remember growing up, being a younger adult and still thinking that adults, like, as you get older, you get more wise and you become a better person. So as the years stack up, you become a better person. And then as I lived a few more years, I started to realize that, well, if you don't live more in line with yourself and intentionally, then you can actually go backwards, and you can actually, start to take on habits and beliefs that are not so good for you or good for society. And I think Jeff is somebody who's always lived his life with control. And you can see he's somebody who's 52 years old. I mean, to me, he's the ambassador of the sport. Like, guy's an absolute legend, and he's still doing it. It's so rad. So it was an absolute honor to get to know Jeff Browning. And now I consider him, I mess with him all the time. I'm like, hey, dude, I'll ask him a question and be like, sorry, bro, you're my smartest friend, so I had to ask you, and I mean, yeah, somebody who I'll definitely always cherish a friendship with, for sure.
I think one of the things that the film does really well is capturing the gravity of the defeat that Arlen experiences and Jeff experiences. And, like, for example, you get that, or Jeff in that post-race interview, like he does the Godfather impression, where, like, in order to maintain some semblance of control, he has to stop his race in Buffalo Park and wait for Harry to come by and, like, give him this handshake, like he's passing the baton. And it's crazy because, I mean, like, you get the impression that Jeff is like alpha male, apex predator, and he's going to stay in control until the end. But at the same time, you get, and maybe a credit to your interviewing skills, like, this race breaks him emotionally. And I wrote down this quote. He says, "It's what was supposed to happen. If I had nailed it, it would have just fed my ego. But that's not always what we need." And he's kind of choking up as he's saying it. So I think that, like you think about how these people are changed by the race, and this, like, alpha male apex predator is, like, brought to his existential knees and forced to kind of reevaluate second place in a 250-mile race that he was, in command of for so long.
Yeah. I mean, Cocodona has this ability to give you more. And we like to think that's the case, right? You sort of think like, oh, do more miles, learn more about yourself, right? I think there was a lot of factors at play here. I think, Versteeg said it. I don't know why this year feels so special, but it just does. And I think we all felt that. I think having a camera in these guys' face for the last 3 months played a part in the way they wanted to finish this race and be perceived and stuff. And I mean, can you imagine taking over the lead, holding the lead for 160 miles, and for that to be stripped from you for something that's never happened to you in your career before? But that is just the surface. Like, when you go deeper into the story, Jeff is new to Flagstaff, Arizona, where Cocodona finishes. And he moved his wife and kids from Bend, Oregon, where they had lived for 17 years. And that's where they had community and friends. And they were new to Flagstaff. And although Jeff Browning's Jeff Browning, so obviously he's going to get running partners all day, and he's going to get people who, validate him and want to hang out with him. It takes a long time to make old friends. And I don't think that's what he had. I don't think he had those really meaningful, vulnerable experiences in that community yet. And that, to me, is what ended up breaking Jeff, was the impact that it had on him and his family, this race. and to be able to showcase what he's all about for multiple days over a live broadcast, and then to not be able to run that in and cross that finish line in first place in front of his new hometown, who's all there to support him. I mean, absolutely devastating when you start to look into it deeper. But then on the flip side of that, you have a community that cheered twice as loud as they maybe would have if he would have crossed the line first, for him to come in second and walk it in, holding his wife's hand, hugging his pastor before crossing the finish line. Half of his church was there. You know, it was, I don't know, that to me, that is what Cocodona is. That's what it's all about.
Is Jeff religious on the same level that Arlen is religious?
You know, I don't know exactly. I mean, I think it's just a little bit different. I don't know their backgrounds. I know that Jeff is, you know, that actually, yeah, don't with that. What I would say is that how I'd respond to that is that Arlen not only grew up in the church, but, you know, his dad left full-time work as a home builder for multiple generations. The men in his family were home builders. Left that because he felt called to do missionary work when Arlen was like 10 years old. So it went from being just somebody who goes to church and practices religion to then it being their family's entire purpose is to share the message of God through Southern style gospel music. And you got Arlen up there. Just, I encourage you, if you're listening to this, hop on YouTube and type in, I forget what their family's band name is, but it's something like the Glick Family Band or something like that. And you will just see Arlen over the years just slapping that bass, just wide stance. Like sometimes they'll bring him up and he'll lead a prayer or lead like a sermon and stuff like that. And so I'm not really sure how to compare him towards like how Jeff utilizes religion in his life, but I know that Jeff, it's very important to him and his family, and they go every week. And actually what was so cool is religion is actually what brought those two guys together, largely. So Arlen, before Cocodona, Arlen came out 7 weeks in advance. So he bought a pull behind trailer and a gravel bike. And his intention was to come out, see the entire course multiple times. And a large part of it, he wanted to stash a bike way up course, come back, run the course, and then hop on his gravel bike and ride it back. And so he did that for like 7 weeks straight.
That's amazing, by the way.
It was really cool. I mean, super special. And, you know, that excited Jamil a lot because it's showing the evolution of this race. Now you're starting to get elites taking it so seriously, but he was here for 7 weeks. Jeff Browning invited Arlen to his church. And so the combination of those two doing some long runs together in the Grand Canyon, as well as on course, and Arlen would go to Jeff Browning's church every Sunday. The combination of that brought them pretty close. So they have a real friendship now.
I would say, and again, I'm injecting just some personal opinion into this. I would say of all the characters, I was influenced by all the characters, but I think the lifestyle that rubbed off on me the most was Jeff's, because I think our world is increasingly chaotic with social media, etc. And I think, like you said earlier, his ability to, or his personality instincts, which are to exert control in any situation and to have processes and to like almost take like a scientific method approach to life. I appreciated that in contrast to how I live, you know, like there were parts of me that were like, I could use a little bit more of the Jeff Browning approach to how I conduct single track business or prepare for my next ultra, you know? Yeah. I don't know who it was for you, but for me, it was Jeff. That's why I was kind of harping on Jeff so much. Like that, he impressed me a lot.
Well, and something that I don't think I said already about Jeff and that for sure should be a takeaway about his personality, is that, you know, he is very dialed, strategic, in control of his life and all of these things. But what's so special about him is that, and unique about him, is that he also is very open-minded, he isn't obsessive over having control. He's somebody who appreciates failure. Yeah. And you can see that within the way that he parents. His kids are, I mean, his youngest, Abraham, is just like him in so many ways. And, you know, Jeff's background is in graphic design and creativity. And I think that shows a lot. And he's somebody who, he controls what he can control, but he's not afraid to fail. And I think that's really special about him and what makes him so well-rounded. Whereas you see some other athletes, you know, like it's been talked about, like somebody like Michael Jordan, or maybe a direct comparison would maybe be somebody like Jim Walmsley, who's been shown to be much more aggressive to what he wants. And if he doesn't get it, it does not sit well with him. And he uses that flame really to come back and make it happen. Whereas I feel like Jeff just has a really good balance.
So again, I'm going to inject some personal opinion here, and I say it with all due respect, because I'm going to talk about Michael McKnight, and he's in the race this year. I hope that I have the privilege to share miles with him, and he's done so much to push this space forward. But when I was watching the film, his character was fascinating to me, because despite his track record of success, it almost feels like he was conceding this space to the next generation before the race even started. Like, he talks a lot about imposter syndrome. When you're interviewing him, he says, like, I would love to even like just be in the mix and maybe give these guys a run for their money. And I found that fascinating for someone who is like, I mean, he is to this point the most decorated 200-mile champion in the sport. He came across as more in doubt of his abilities than I would have imagined.
Yeah. Getting to know Mike on a deeper level was definitely very fascinating. To respond directly to what you just said, I would say that something I learned about Mike is that he feels that a lot of his successes in the sport, a lot of his best finishes and best performances have come unexpectedly. And that's how he talks about them. So a lot of his wins, a lot of his best performances were not expected. And so I think he believes that for himself, it's better to lose expectation, and almost to some degree, it does feel like he's really downplaying his ability. It does feel like sometimes that he is going into things without confidence. But I also know that he's somebody who puts in the work, and I know that he, to some degree, and I can relate to this a lot, and it's something I was relating to him while spending that time with him, was that it does seem like he does have confidence. He does have an alpha mentality. He does want to win, but he doesn't want to show it. And I have my own reasons for doing things like that. I think there are a lot of men who have similar experiences. You know, life is difficult. There's a lot of things that could make you a little bit more cautious in terms of how you're perceived and stuff. But largely, I just think that Mike's performances were, nobody else was doing those at these distances at that time, at least in the US. And so he was labeled as the guy. I mean, it's been said that he's the GOAT of 200s. You know, a lot of these, you know, big statements about him and his capabilities. He had big sponsors. And I think those were things that he started, you know, when he, just like a lot of ultra running as it's happened throughout the years, is he didn't get into running 200s for any of these reasons. You get it because you're excited about the adventure and you're curious what you can do out there. and you let your own competitive spirit ride. It's probably similar to like your race at your first Cocodona. And it just so happened that he had success, and that ultimately changed his relationship with the sport. And so now, since those successes, he's been trying to prove to everybody else that he is who they think he is. And now he's trying to reverse that desperately, it seems.
It's interesting because I know he's a disciple of Jeff. I think he's coached by Jeff Browning. And like you think about Jeff, and I think the reason Jeff was probably drawing so much confidence going into this race was because he knew, probably similar to Arlen, that he did everything he possibly could have in the build-up to understand this course, to figure out 200s, etc. And I would have put Mike in that same lane because Mike is super disciplined and exacting in that way. But so it just
they're very different.
Yeah.
They're very different, and I think that's the beauty of their relationship. You know what I mean? Like a lot of those attributes that Jeff has that, you know, we would consider to make him very, very dialed, very in control, all these things. Mike McKnight doesn't have those same things, and he knows that about himself. But what Mike has is Mike is sort of full of surprises. He's somebody who's a little bit more driven by, I would say, as like a creative, I can sort of relate to it. I feel like he's more driven by what excites him, what he wants to do more so in that moment. And he's kind of harder to control, basically, in that sense. He's like, it's harder to get him to follow something over a year or 2 years, like a plan over a year or 2 years. He's going to be somebody who's more like what he's excited about and what he's interested in doing is ever changing. And there's pros and cons to that for sure, because that leads him, I think lots of times he maybe questions the direction he should go, but I think that just goes back to who he's doing it for, you know?
When you think about, because I'm sure every single character in this film has some sort of transformation where they learn something about themselves. If you think about Jeff or Arlen or Mike or Joe, maybe it's Joe. Like, what does one of these people learn about themselves that you found interesting? Like for Joe, for example, because he was leading the race for so long, he also was someone who came in with sort of lofty expectations. How is he changed by this experience, or what has he learned about himself?
Joe is an interesting one because like he would be, I would say going into it, he was very much largely considered to be the one to take it. I would say it depends who you ask, but for me, I felt that Joe had all of the talent. He was in the prime of his career. He's got it over different distances. He's one of the toughest athletes I've ever been around. And also, I just felt that no matter what the field threw at him, he would be able to handle. It was very interesting watching his race unfold, watching him go out early and wanting to be alone. And I think that's just very representative of, I think he's a quiet grinder. I think he's somebody who's okay being out there alone. He doesn't need competition to push him per se, but I think in some degree it might have just wanted to catapult him out front so he could be alone and exist alone and just be him and his crew and moving quick and moving efficiently. I know that his expectations at this race were to win for sure. As a viewer of the race and as a fan of the race and of the sport, I think that winning was something that he could have done. And so to fail at that the way he did, it was tough. That's what's so interesting about this race is it's not all based on performance. And I think that's what we saw with Joe McConaughy actually is, or fitness, I should say. Like his race was very much changed by the fact that he couldn't sleep and he couldn't sort of shut down when he needed to shut down and then turn on when he expected to turn on. And ultimately, that's what kind of derailed his race. And some of that, we don't know all the facts, but could have been because of what occurred in the race. I mean, when he got lost in the Granite Dells, that was only a couple hours before he was supposed to have his planned first sleep. And so to be out there in the Dells, lost, you lose an hour just running around, then you get past to move back into second place. And then Jeff Browning proceeds to drop the hammer and create a gap. You all of a sudden are then showing into your first sleep with your mind racing and unable to. Whereas maybe if he did not get lost, he would have been able to show up there and it was business as usual. I fall asleep for the first time and then I go set the course record and Joe McConaughy is the winner of this race. So it's like he was definitely fit enough to win the race, but there's just so much to a race like this when you go multi-day that can affect the outcome. And that's what's so interesting, I think, about these multi-day races.
Again, I could be wrong here, but and I mean this in a positive way. Of the four characters, he seemed the least complicated. Like it seemed like he had reached this evolved state of personality and outlook on life where he could take statements like try harder or push through this section at face value and just execute, like he wasn't burdened. He didn't seem like he was weighed down philosophically in the same way that maybe like Mike McKnight was, or after the fact, you see just how much of an emotional toll this race took on Arlen or Jeff. Again, just the way it was presented to him, it didn't seem like this was really weighing on him like the experience did on the others.
I mean, you're exactly right. I have that same takeaway. I think it's a part of his personality and what makes him so great. Something that is surprising about Joe that I learned spending more time with him was just that I'm sure he genuinely believes it, but he's somebody who he doesn't like to create magnitude around something that he's doing. He likes to believe that it's all controlled. We've prepared for this, and it's well within reason. And so he doesn't like to consider the fact that he's going to go to a dark place to get this win, or that would be a part of this experience at all. And he's also somebody who has, he's the youngest sibling. And I think he has a part of that in him where he's kind of happy-go-lucky. He can be in a miserable state and make everybody around him smile. And I don't think that's a front at all. I think these are the thoughts that are in his head. I would say his life is no less complicated or interesting than any of these other athletes, but I'm only getting what his perceived version of life is, and I think something that maybe could have helped a bit more with Joe was getting more supporting interviews from people around him about his life and how it's evolved and stuff like that. Because Joe's pretty even keeled, really funny, never afraid to make a joke in a scenario where maybe it's not, expected. And, but I do know that he wanted to win the race. Not only that, he wanted to be in the mix, and he knows he could have been. And I believe that we're going to see a rebuttal to this year's race from Joe McConaughy that's going to prove that, basically. What's really cool about Cocodona and what I'm excited about is, we've got Jeff Browning's take, which is that in order to get these times, it's going to involve a deep field. because we need to get pushed. We need to not take those extra 10 minutes, 15 minutes at an aid station, take that extra sleep in order to get to these times. But I also think that it's exciting to imagine maybe a less deep field, but the challenge of these impressive times that have come before. And now that the time is so competitive, I think it gives something for somebody like Joe McConaughy to go back and say like, hey, same course. I knew I had it in me. The guy's a winner. It's what he is. And he's been unfortunately plagued with injury. And that's really been what's held him back from success. And I think what was so cool about Cocodona is that that was the first finish line in 2 years, I believe, for him. So I think that was very special. And I think ultimately that's what's like giving him confidence going into some of these races that he's now had success again. We're starting to see that success come back after Cocodona because he pushed through a lot, you know.
Last thing I want to cover before we go, I actually want to bring it full circle because at the beginning of this conversation, we were talking about the incentives to make this film, the economics of our industry that make this actually kind of a rare thing. And I want to maybe find a way in this last bit of the conversation to maybe influence the industry. I don't know. But you were basically saying that in your experience to date, with the exceptions of outlets like Aravaipa Running, it is not financially viable for brands to fund a project where storytelling is king. And I want to know why, because it seems like these are the only films that people ever remember. These are the films that tend to get the most views and long-lasting impressions. So the ROI to me seems obvious. Like if you scroll through the comments of Inaugural Year, for example, or Long Way Home, those films are probably responsible for like 80% of the registrations for Cocodona this year and all the brand activations around Hoka and stuff. So I'm at a loss for why it isn't an obvious investment. What are your thoughts? Like, what's your explanation?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think that this is a sport that's not accessible for all creatives. You can't be somebody who shoots weddings and then shoots corporate stuff, and then all of a sudden you're going to stay up for 3.5 days and sleep only 20 minutes and be driving around these obscure back roads and pull this story off. So you have to be within the sport. So that kind of limits the amount of creatives that are going to come into it. Also, in terms of like the full spectrum of industry, ultra running is budget wise on the lower end when you compare to maybe even other outdoor sports like skiing or mountain biking, something like that. And so, yeah, you've got to have creatives who are really passionate about this. So you don't have so many to choose from. Then you've got a lot of brands coming into the sport as it's building. And so these brands are understanding that a very powerful aspect to this sport is story and it's human connection and it's feeling. And it's that's a powerful way to sell your product, is to create a feeling and a story around it. And so I just think that there's enough work to go around for the, I say kind of the few creatives in the space that they're all consumed by these brand funded projects that have an agenda to make essentially like a glorified commercial for these brands. It's like the focus isn't the community. The focus is showcasing this athlete wearing this product, and how do we kind of make people believe that, they're going to have some life altering message within this like 9-minute piece that we throw up on YouTube or whatever.
Sure.
So I think what needs to happen personally is that it really is the community that we need to start to approach. I think the community in the sport of ultra running can be supporters of projects in some way. And I don't know exactly how that's going to be, but we need to get back to how it was done before. It's what's made somebody like Billy Yang so influential, somebody like JB Benna, is because they were making their final product was only aimed at the community of ultra running. And it was for the community. It was something like we could hold on to and cherish. And there wasn't this collaboration with these brands. The brands were supporting their athletes in this project that the overall vision was geared towards the community. And I think that's what we need to get back to. So I like to think, like, for me, I think there is some sort of I think brands are going to have to get in line. I think there's a lot of brands out there. Maybe you think of somebody like Ultra Sign Up. I think that's what's so special about Aravaipa Running, is that they are largely a brand for the community. They appeal to everybody from the elites to the people who are just finding running. And I think that's what's so special about working with them, and why they don't dictate. They just believe in good story for the community, and there is no agenda there. And I think there's more brands that are like I just said, like Ultra Sign Up, who could potentially get involved in that kind of support, finding films that are for the betterment of the sport, that like preserve what we all love about the sport, in support of creatives who want to tell those stories and have that interpersonal connection with like the community. So, I mean, as we start to see like the bigger films with the bigger athletes get presented to filmmakers who work for these big production companies, and they all of a sudden they're showing up to finish lines with like 8 cameras and a director on like a little director monitor and stuff like that. To me, human beings, society, I should say, ruins everything good. It's just a matter of time. So what's super fun about being in ultra running right now is that there's a sense that we need to preserve what we feel is good about it. And for me, that's what I'm so passionate about, is just kind of recognizing that, understanding that I'm for sure not like this person who would maybe change it all myself, or to even think I have the power to do that. I just like to think that I'm a part of this community, and that I have been around it long enough to have kind of an opinion, and then I've garnered a little bit of responsibility up in my own brain to then provide and protect the spirit like of ultra running. Basically, making films is the hardest thing I've ever done, and I don't think it's going to get any easier. When it comes to being like a good filmmaker or the right fit, I've been humbled so many times. I know what I'm so excited about filmmaking is, to me, it's a journey. It's a lifelong journey. I think that there are so many people out there who could maybe do a better job. But what I love about this sport, and what I think will continue to happen, is that a lot of the films come from a passion of and a connection to an athlete, a friend. They're kind of that grassroots, a lot of these stories. And so, you might have a certain connection to a story or an athlete that forces you to go further than you would have gone if you were approached by maybe some random brand, right? Or some random athlete who you then had to kind of learn their story and understand what direction they want to go. So I think we're still in the space of ultra running. I think the budgets are still there, where it's easier to be a creative who's got a connection with a certain athlete, and then you reach out to the brand, and maybe you're willing to go a little above and beyond because that guy, or that guy lives like an hour from you, and you can go film a little bit more and a little bit extra. So I don't know, man. I don't have I don't know, Finn. I don't know what we do here.
I mean, honestly, I know this is maybe frustrating for some people in the audience, but I think this is actually the perfect place to end it, because this has been an awesome conversation, and I think I just have a lot to think about. I'm sure you do too. And I don't know. I think we've achieved what I wanted to achieve, which is just to celebrate your effort here and how cool this film is, and how grateful I am that it's coming to the community. I can only imagine how heavy of a lift it was and how exhausted you must be, but just huge salute to you and Jamil and everyone on the team, Dills, Drew Darby, list goes on. Like, thanks to you all for doing the good work and entertaining us all and just rightfully telling all these stories, right? So thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Vin. I always appreciate talking to you, and I appreciate the work you're doing. It's world class, and yeah, it was a pleasure. So I appreciate you.